Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the What the Fantasy Football Show. We have a great show in store for you tonight with all our hosts, but first, we are a member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. 17 different podcasts. We're bringing more in all the time. We have everything covered. We have IDP. We have Superflex. We have Dynasty. Of course, Redraft, Best Ball. Come check us out. You can find us at FF Champs. You can find us at fulltimefantasy.com. We are everywhere. And now let's get into it. We got to get into it with the man, the one and only, the guy who tames the tigers while kissing the kittens. And that is the one, the only, Mr. Tony Sincata.
I'll tell you what, it's getting fired up. We're getting closer to the time where we're starting the season. We got drafts going on. But all I can think about when you think about taming tigers is Mike Blewett. How did that work for Siegfried and Roy? You keep playing with the tigers, and every once in a while, it's going to go wrong.
I mean, they're wild animals, so assuming that they wouldn't retreat back to their roots at some point is probably a suboptimal wager, I would say.
Jim, when the tiger decided to eat Roy or Siegfried, I'm not sure which one got eaten.
It was Roy that got attacked.
Roy got eaten. Do you think Siegfried was jealous?
Only because he wanted to taste too.
I know, I've seen that. I saw that show live in Vegas.
How was it?
They didn't eat you, huh?
No, thankfully. It was weird and not great. It just was a really odd dream sequence for about 45 minutes. There were no tigers out there. I was like, let's just go on with the tigers. I've been here for 45 minutes. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time. I'm exhausted. And then like the second half of the show is a bunch of tiger tricks. And there's an elephant. And I don't remember it being entertaining at all.
For all you people out there, it's the first time listening to WTF Fantasy Football. This happens from time to time. All of a sudden, we're here to talk about football. We're going to cover football like nobody. But every once in a while, Siegfried and Roy get in the way, and other things will get in the way. But I got to tell you, we get a lot of people looking for information this time of year. And fantasy football is the king when it comes to fantasy sports. We have over 60 million people playing. And one of the reasons that you hear time and time again is you have the people that don't play any other fantasy sports because football is the easiest. You tune in Sunday once a week. You don't have games every day. We all have points. We don't have 10 categories like baseball. But I got to ask you, Jim, do you think the holdout situation involving this year 2 running backs that'll be drafted in the first round, Ezekiel Elliott, Melvin Gordon. Last year we had Le'Veon Bell in 2018. Do you think the holdouts are actually hurting the fantasy football drafts in the new people that play? I know if you listen to a podcast, if you're watching a video, you're hardcore. But what about keeping these new blood and keeping people coming to the fantasy industry? How tough is it with all these holdout situations?
Well, look, if it's their favorite player, it could definitely be an effect. You know, when you're first starting out, when you want to play this game, a lot of people gravitate towards grabbing the players on teams they like. And if it's your team, all of a sudden have all this going on, it could be a detriment to that. But, I don't see it so much as that. I think it really comes down to how much risk you're willing to absorb into your fantasy team and whether or not you want to take that chance. Some guys are worth taking a chance on. Some others aren't.
I'll tell you what, it's interesting you say that because I think I would have picked Ezekiel Elliott with a 3rd or 4th pick in drafts this year. But Le'Veon Bell's situation last year has really put into perspective where I probably wouldn't pick till like 8 or 9. Mike, what's your sense on this situation with Ezekiel Elliott, Melvin Gordon, and fantasy football in whole?
Well, I'll take the overall question that Jim answered first. And I think for somebody that's relatively new to fantasy football or is just, playing in their one league and not spending a ton of time on it, look, introducing anybody to a more complicated type of league and certainly a more complicated set of circumstances could conceivably turn them off. I think that's sort of what you were driving at. But we wouldn't ever ask somebody that's playing for the first time to join in a vampire league or a 45-man IDP roster dynasty league. It would be too confusing and it would be difficult for them to compete. They probably wouldn't want to do it. So in that sense, yes, these holdouts could complicate it. But I do think it is a good thing for somebody that wants to be a bigger fan of the sport to get introduced to these types of contractual complications that open up the business side of it. I think it teaches you a lot more about the sport. Now, comparing Le'Veon Bell in 2018 to the two this year, I think Gordon is more comparable in that he is willing to hold out a significant period of time. Obviously, as we know, Zeke Elliott has 2 years left on his deal. I do think they're driving towards some sort of solution, even though it seems that it's at an impasse right now. Can Zeke hold out into the season? Absolutely. Will it be anywhere near as long as Melvin Gordon and or Le'Veon Bell? I don't think so.
Where are you picking him? Where would you let Zeke fall in draft?
I mean, I'm going to be drafting 4th on September 1st. It's possible we'll know more in the next 10 days, but I would still consider taking him there. Although I think it probably pushes him a little bit closer to, the 6 to 8 range, the deeper we go. I think by this weekend, when there's going to be a ton of drafts going on, I think those top 5 picks will go without Zeke Elliott. Wouldn't you say, Jim?
Well, it's definitely getting tighter. We're seeing him drop a little bit. I actually ran a FFWC high stakes draft last night, and the guy who had the 10th pick was actually late to the draft. So he actually got auto-picked the first 2 rounds, and then he showed up. But those first 2 picks for him, and again, he had the 10th pick in the draft, he ended up with Zeke, and then on the turnaround, he got Travis Kelce.
Wow.
Got to be 2 of the sweetest auto picks I've ever seen in my life. To get them together on one team, but not by choice, is, to me, amazing.
Tony,
Zeke fell to 10.
Tony, remember a few years ago when Lev Bell got suspended those first 2 games? You and I must have done 20 shows about it. And we said, it doesn't matter. Just draft him first overall anyway. He's going to be the best by the end of the year. This 2-game penalty that he's receiving at the beginning, you can survive those first 2 games of the year without him. If Lev Bell stays healthy for the final 11 games of the regular fantasy season and into the playoffs, you'll have the best running back. I sort of see that now with Zeke, even if you don't think he's the consensus number 1 overall, that sort of penalty, a holdout penalty to your season, I don't think will be significant enough for him to have to continue to drop.
Let me ask one last crazy scenario on Ezekiel Elliott.
Give me a chance to answer that question.
Oh, go ahead, Jim. Go ahead. But it just came to me, Jim. It came to me, and I didn't want to let it go.
Okay, real quick. The whole Zeke at 4 thing. Before all this nonsense, I had him at 2. Then when he came back, and then I started sliding him down to 3, and then finally 4. And then, he came back. He came back to town, and it was all looking good. And then Jerry Jones opened up his mouth and said, Zeke who? And, come on, you don't think Zeke's going to take that as an affront to him? Of course he is. It's another way for him to drive a wedge in to the contract negotiations.
Yeah.
Absolutely he could use that to his advantage. So at that point, Jerry, you were an idiot. Okay. So I've actually slid him down now to number 5. I have him right behind David Johnson now. But if he's in camp anywhere in the next 2 weeks, he's going to jump right back to 2 for me.
All right, I'm going to ask you a way out scenario. Jerry is a little crazy. He's done some irrational things once or twice. What if he trades Ezekiel Elliott? What does that do with his value outside of Dallas?
Well, it really does depend on where he goes. I mean, no doubt about it. I mean, if he goes to Washington behind that O-line, I won't like it. If he goes to and I'm not talking about teams that actually need running backs. I'm just saying he goes to a team like Philly with a great offensive line, then I'm going to love him. I get the outside the box thinking, Tony, but I think Dallas would be stupid to do that because right now they're, a Super Bowl contending team with Zeke. Without him, I don't care how good Tony Pollard is. They're not anywhere close to that. At that point, they're even trying to survive as a wild card.
Mike, your thoughts on Zeke with a new home?
I think Jim's right in that it depends where he goes, but it is unlikely that he would arrive in a town that would have as good an offensive line as he has right now. There's really only 1 or 2 that he could mention in the same breath as them, and when they're healthy, they're still the best offensive line in the league. Maybe not what it was a couple of years ago, but still right there at the top.
There you have it. Next, we're going to talk about a player that plays so little but is talked about so much when it comes to fantasy football podcast, radio shows. He's the New England Patriots wide receiver, Josh Gordon. Josh Gordon was reinstated by the NFL. He's eligible to play week 1. Mike, Where are you on Josh Gordon? Are you in on Josh Gordon? I've done about 12 drafts. I don't own Josh Gordon on a single team, but he's been drafted in every league I play in. What's your thoughts on Mr. Gordon?
His numbers without Gronkowski on the field last year ended up being pretty good. He was second in targets and market share, only to Julian Edelman. I think you would expect more of the same, and it may not be the explosive Josh Gordon that we saw 5 years ago, but a number one outside wide receiver in that offense. I think you're going to be looking at a good amount of catches. Like I said, it may not look as explosive, but I do think that Josh Gordon can really work his way into that wide receiver 2 to 3 conversation.
Jim, what's your thoughts on Gordon? And realistically, what are you looking at drafting him?
I like Gordon coming back. As Mike mentioned, he did well when Gronkowski wasn't on the field last year. Actually, was averaging close to 100 yards a game, almost 100 yards in those games without Gronk. I do like him coming back. But right now, we've seen the ADP fly up with the news, and as it should be. And look, he's a talented guy. Like Mike said, he's got the upside to be a wide receiver too in this league, no doubt about it, especially in that offense that's starving for wide receiver playmakers. So I like that option there, but his ADP has risen so fast that I've seen him now go at the end of the 4th round.
Yeah,
too much.
And I can't do it. I can't even do 5th round. Because there's so many other good wide receivers in those 2 rounds that I just trust so much more. I like Gordon and the talent is there, but man, at 4th, 5th round, that's just too heavy for me. 6th round, I could start to think about it, but before that, not really.
I think what people lose sight of each time this guy comes back, it's been 5 years. He hasn't been able to stay on the field.
Right.
I mean, even if you draft him and even if he's able to play, you're not guaranteed to have this guy for too long. I mean, last year, everything was going well for him. And all of a sudden, that's
Still didn't
it.
happen. That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the NFL didn't even suspend him, and that was done.
Yeah. And James White had 123 targets last year. You can't forget that. Julian Edelman had 108 in 12 games. And Gordon's going to slot in behind those guys. He'll be 3rd in targets on the team, probably, right? I can't suspect that they'll start out targeting James White. Edelman probably goes back into the lead, adding back in the 4 games, but James White may still very well be the 2nd most targeted player on the team just because the way they run their offense. They obviously ran the ball a lot last year as well. So not a guarantee, but I still think White would come in 2nd in targets.
Jim, your thoughts?
I don't know. It just seemed like I'm like the only one on the planet that's down on James White this year. After the incredible year he had, I get it. But, now you have some other players that are in the mix. Of course, they drafted Damian Harris, who can do a little bit of everything, can catch the ball as well. They brought back Rex Burkhead. Just the fact that he will step on the field at time and take somebody's chances away. And then add in the fact that they brought in Cordarrelle Patterson and have been using him in camp as a running back. They haven't been using him as a wide receiver. They've been using him as a running back in camp. And then add in the fact that Gordon looks to be back now and ready to go. And, man, I just think it's not going to be as big a year for White as people are expecting. He did a lot of damage last year on the ground with almost 500 yards rushing and 5 rushing TDs. I just don't think he gets those chances again. Still a great receiving running back. I get it. But without those 500 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns, he would have been a lot lower last year. And that's kind of where I'm looking at him this year.
You know what's interesting? With Gordon coming back, you mentioned Edelman, we mentioned James White. The New England Patriots quarterback, Tom Brady, future Hall of Famer, maybe the best quarterback ever to play a game. I'm in drafts where he's going outside the top 12. Jim,
outside the top 12? His current ADP is quarterback 20, Tony.
Yeah, so he's outside the top 12. You bring back Josh Gordon. Does this move Tom Brady up in your mind? I'll tell you what, it doesn't for me, because I think you saw a change last year where they ran the ball. And I think I think Sonny Michel is the most underrated player that I've seen in drafts this year. I think he's going to be fine, and I think he's going to run all over the place. Tom Brady being picked where he should be?
Not a QB 20. QB 13, 14, I could see that, basically where he finished last year. But QB 20, that's, too many people wanting the new shiny toy and pushing the old guy off. I don't care what you say. He didn't have the greatest year, and he still had a good year last year. I couldn't take him behind some of these guys getting drafted earlier than him just on possible upside. It doesn't make sense.
Completed 66% of his passes, 29 to 11 touchdown interception ratio. If you made me bet, Tony, I'd say those numbers are spot on for 2019 as well. I think they just put Brady in a position to be successful. He doesn't have to make as many difficult throws. He hasn't had to in several years. That's why I think he's able to play at this level. Maybe it's not vintage Brady from 2008, but they're getting to Super Bowls and they're winning Super Bowls. So what does he care? He doesn't care what the style points are. I'm with you on Michelle. I do think they want to continue to take the pressure off of Brady so he can last deeper into the season. Making a comparison, we saw Drew Brees' play fall off at the end of the year. I think you can see the accuracy in some of these old quarterbacks be challenged later in the season. So I think Brady's spot on with that. QB 14, QB 15, you're fine to get him around there. And if you wanted to take a shot with him because Gordon's back at being the last guy in that QB1 conversation, I couldn't argue with it.
There you have it. Speaking of New England Patriots quarterbacks, Jimmy Garoppolo, I guess, set a practice record in the NFL, had 5 consecutive passes intercepted, then followed up with a poor season game. And I'm sitting here watching him play in the preseason game. I'm saying, man, the San Francisco 49ers got Matt Cassels. Mike Blewett, could Jim Garoppolo be the next Matt Cassels? For all the people that didn't follow football, Matt Cassels filled in for Tom Brady when Brady was injured in the first game of the year. He went to 11-5. He cashed in a huge contract, free agency, and got a lot of money, but didn't play too well in the NFL. Are we seeing Jimmy Garoppolo, the next guy to be Matt Cassels, Mike Blewett?
Well, Jim and I have actually talked about this before. A lot was given to Jimmy Garoppolo before he had earned it in that same sense that Matt Cassel had. At least Matt Cassel had played a full season.
Yeah.
He went 11-4 because they lost that game that Brady tore his ACL.
That's true.
So he went 11-4 the rest of the way. Only 11-5 team ever to miss the NFL playoffs, by the way. So
I love Mike's little tidbits like that.
So for him to play with a 0 quarterback rating the other day, and what does he get? The Nate Peterman Award, by the way, for the 5 consecutive picks. If they should Peterman should feel better because he didn't throw 5 picks in a row. Garoppolo threw 5 picks in a row. So nonetheless, I have said this for a while that the Niners really have made as big a bet in the league as you can make, hoping that he would be the guy that they thought they saw in practice or on tape or in previous preseasons working in one of the most efficient offenses in the league. So it's all on them. It's the big bet with money and all players around them. And there's no guarantee that Garoppolo will be Tom Brady, obviously. But in the Kyle Shanahan offense, you hope even if he plays conservatively, they can have a good offense, Tony.
All right. I'll ask you, Mike, real quick before we go to Jim. Would you consider him in 2 quarterback leagues?
Yeah.
Oh, hell no. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me.
Oh, in two QB leagues, not a super flex?
No, either one.
Yeah, I would consider it, but my first guy would have to be real strong.
Jim, how about yourself?
No. I'm staying away. He hasn't proven anything to me yet. I know there's a lot of people out there that love him, think he's going to be the next godsend. He just hasn't shown any of that. And, when you go back and look at last year, Nick Mullins comes out of nowhere.
You love Mullins.
What?
You love Mullins.
Hey, I do. He surprised the heck out of me. It's
me too.
Not often that a guy comes out of nowhere that I haven't heard of and just plays the way he did. He played good. They love him. He's a hard worker. He knows the offense inside and out. I think his father is a coach, not at this level, but he knows football, so he knows the game very well. And if you look at the numbers that he played with and that Garoppolo played with, Mullins was better. He put up more fantasy points than Garoppolo did on average. So it's like, give the kid a chance. I think he's better quarterback.
Tony, what about the guys around Jimmy G, though, like being drafted? Would you rather have Jimmy G or Mitch Trubisky or Dak Prescott?
Yes.
So I actually would take a shot at Mitchell Trubisky. I just love that offense. I don't like Trubisky as a quarterback. So I'm hoping that someone's right when they made it with that second pick of the draft. So I think I would take the chance there. Now, Dak, I would take a chance on if I thought Ezekiel Elliott would be out there longer. but I just don't think they have enough throws there that I would probably gamble on Garoppolo and just the offense.
Are you kidding me?
I said
Really?
I said it'd be a gamble, Jim. All gambles
Holy
don't come out
crap.
perfect, Jim.
Look,
What about Darnold or Carr?
wait, you can say what you want about Dak, and maybe he's not the greatest NFL quarterback, but for fantasy, he's damn good. This is a kid who has 6 rushing touchdowns every year he's played in the league. And last year, when they acquired Cooper, from the time they acquired Cooper through the end of the season, Dak was the number 4 fantasy quarterback. And you're telling me you're going to take a chance on Jimmy Garoppolo over Dak? You're freaking nuts.
Well,
what about Sam Darnold, Tony?
Yeah, well, I'm going to get to Donald next. When you get older, Jim, every year you start to run a little less.
When you get older, Tony, I'm pretty sure I got your beat in that.
Yeah, you run a little less, Jim. I think you run a little less than you did 2 years ago, 4 years ago. And I think the same thing with Dak Prescott and usually most all running quarterbacks. Now, Sam Darnold is the interesting one because the more and more I watch this Jets, we're gonna talk about the Jets a little later in the show, so we might as well jump into it. I like what I see from the Jets. I like what I see from Sam Darnold. But I say to myself, it's the preseason. Relax. But then I think back to I thought he was the best quarterback in that draft. Baker Mayfield definitely surprises me the way he's played. So I look at this and I'm saying I'm gonna take a shot on Sam Darnold. I think, and those wide receivers he has there are not great. They're not household names, but I think they're all serviceable wide receivers.
Look, I like Sam Darnold. I did have Baker Mayfield ahead of him coming out of the draft. I like Baker a lot. As brash as he may be, he's an excellent quarterback. But Sam Darnold, while he got off to a sloppy start last year and just looked like he was lost, he was still trying to figure out the game. He was thinking too much. He had the injury towards the middle of the season where he missed a couple of games. And then when he came back from that, it looked like a totally different quarterback. It looked like all of a sudden he calmed down, the game started coming to him, and he was playing well. And he was a good fantasy quarterback over that last few games as well. And I just think he's a guy that's going to get better. I like him. But you're right. I'm not totally enamored with, the playmakers around him. Of course, you got Lev Bell. I get it. They brought in Ty Montgomery. I'm sure they'll find little pieces to use of him. But, outside of Robbie Anderson, and to me, Robbie Anderson isn't the quintessential wide receiver 1. To me, he's a nice wide receiver 2 on a team, but he's not the true number 1. And, Quincy Enunwa has been good for them. And now, of course, they brought in Jamison Crowder. If he could stay healthy, he probably does pretty well for them in the slot. But I'm not really enamored with this offense. And, it comes back to me that, when you think of Gase as the head coach, this is the guy who ran the fewest plays in the league last year in Miami. And that scares me. He runs a slow offense. Now they're saying he's doing things and changing things up. And if they come out that way, so much the better. But all we know of him so far is that he runs a slow offense, and that scares me too.
See, Mike, I like the talent a little better. Like Jim mentioned, Jamison Crowder, I think he's going to be strong in the slot in that offense. Le'Veon Bell, we all know how he catches the ball out of the backfield. I'm a little confused on what they're going to do with Montgomery once the season starts and how they're going to antiquate him into the offense. I think they're surprised by how well he plays. I think Enunwa, you know what? He's not great, but he's going to catch balls thrown to him. So I think there's a lot of their offense. But to Jim's point, when I think about Adam Gase, I sit back and I start laughing, and I say, Tony, this team's going nowhere.
Yeah. So there's a story today about how Adam Gase really likes a lot of the guys he has, and he's got his type of guys in here, and everybody's working hard. And it was the ultimate coach plant story. He gave somebody a story so that they can write something positive about the Jets. I'm a big believer in Darnold. And as much as Adam Gase does run a slow offense, and I didn't think he did a good job in Miami, he was also only given 3 years. In those 3 years, he was turning over the roster massively. They've done a little bit of that with the Jets already. They've obviously added 3 new offensive linemen and a couple of the weapons that have already been mentioned. I will say that I have been a believer in Darnold. Gase does have a track record of working with good quarterbacks. It's up to you, obviously, to decide whether or not you think he had any real impact on any of these guys. But in terms of a coach matching up with a quarterback, unlike the Steve Wilks, Josh Rosen thing last year, I think the Gase Sam Darnold thing could be a good thing this year. Do I think Adam Gase is a good coach? Not really, but I do think he is the right guy to potentially help Darnold develop. And I will say that in terms of Robbie Anderson, I think he has massive potential this year. If things do go well for the Jets, I think you're getting a bargain at the 30th wide receiver off the board right now. So I think Anderson has a chance to be in the wide receiver 2 conversation if things go well for the Jets.
Now, the only question I got to add to that is, where did he actually help any quarterback? I mean, his best years with quarterbacks were with, come on, he helped Cutler? He helped Tannehill? Come on, really?
No,
his best
to be
years
fair
as
on the
a quarterback
Tannehill,
coach
to
were
be
with
fair on the
Peyton Manning.
Tannehill conversation, in the last 3 years, Ryan Tannehill was hurt last year, out for the entire year the year before, and actually played a pretty good season in 2016 before he was injured. They made the playoffs, and Matt Moore had to take over at the end there. So he actually did not have one full season with Tannehill. I can't say that he helped him develop. Obviously, he's a backup now in Tennessee.
Well, maybe
not.
Yeah,
We'll see how well Mariota plays. But in that sense, I have to give Gase a pass. Ultimately, Gase is a power-hungry dude. He's the one that turned over the roster in Miami and brought them to what could potentially be the worst team in the league. And now he finds himself on the Jets getting a GM fired and turning that roster over. So I'm not going to defend him. I just think that there's potential here for him to be able to help Darnold develop.
I also like the Jets defense, and they lost 2 linebackers this week. So
that's brutal. The worst coaching decision thus far in the preseason. He left Avery Williamson in at a time when he didn't need to be in there, and he's got a torn ACL. And C.J. Mosley, who got a ton of money, and there's no guarantee that C.J. Mosley can live up to that contract.
Yeah, it's terrible. And speaking of that, real quick, did you see the Atlanta Falcons game? Matt Ryan getting beat up left and right every time he drops back, and he's in there for almost the entire first half.
I'll tell you what.
What are you thinking?
Dropped 2 touchdown passes on him, too.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. That offensive line, that was real. And I would love to know, and I don't know this, is if the whole first group is in there. Because I truly believe you never leave a starting quarterback at the caliber of Matt Ryan in without your first offensive line in there. I want to know how many starters were in there, because that was horrible.
I believe it was their starting offensive line. I'll double check for next week's show, but I think it was.
Yeah, I don't think they would leave him in there, Tony, unless they had those guys in there. It's possible some guys were a little banged up.
But to me, that's even beyond the point. The first time the guy goes down, you know what? He's coming off the field for me.
Yeah. It was their third
coming
game.
Off the field.
It was their third game. I don't think you're going to see him much for the rest of the preseason matchups. Obviously, you won't see him next week. We'll see what it leaves this week. But I think they were trying to get in their reps because it was their third game, and they were fine to let Matty Ice play for a whole bunch and then sit him the rest of the preseason. But
well, it's good.
You know what I think. I just wouldn't have him out there at all. What does he have to prove?
It's good they still have Bobby Joe Hebert out there to back him up, right?
Matt Schaub. Matt Sims. I thought Matt Sims was going to get murdered at the end of that game. There are times when you feel bad for those third stringers in preseason where they're going to cut the entire offensive line and maybe even the quarterback himself, and he's just about to get killed out there. Matt Sims took a beating as well.
If that was a regular job, now I don't know how these injury settlements work, because the NFL, of course, is one of those organizations. Yeah, it's one of those organizations that don't follow the rest of the laws that America does. It would be beneficial if you were the third string quarterback to go out there and take an injury and then take the workman's comp, but you can't do that in the NFL.
They give you cut you a check for like $25,000 and say good luck with the rehab.
Yeah, I don't even think you get $25,000, so I think they would be happy about that. I'll tell you what, we cover everything. We're getting into injuries today. And speaking of injuries, right next to injury in the dictionary should be a picture of Andrew Luck. The sagger keeps going on. He's got a little ankle injury. He's got a bone bruise injury. We don't know what he's got. He practices 3 days and then never plays again. Jim, how is this affecting your drafts? I do have one team with Andrew Luck, but I don't think that's the story. I want to know how you can have confidence in drafting T.Y. Hilton and Marlon Mack, where they're currently going with the Andrew Luck. And do you draft Andrew Luck in any draft? Jim?
Okay, well, a lot of questions there. So yes, I do think right now the situation is untenable. It's just we have no idea. This is the same exact thing we went through with the shoulder. He's fine. He's fine. He's fine. He's fine. Oh wait, he's going to have surgery and be out for a year. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but it just feels that same type of situation. They're not giving us all the information. If they don't know all the information at this point, what the heck are they doing? So it really does scare me. But the savvy fantasy owner is going to make it work for them. And what I mean by that is, look, he was going before usually as the number 3 quarterback being drafted, usually 6th, 7th, 8th round, depending on your draft and how it was flowing. But he was usually the 2nd or 3rd quarterback off the board. Now, with all this news, everybody's concerned. All of a sudden, he's fallen, and I've seen this, fallen into the 12th and 13th round. You know what? If he falls into the 12th round in a draft I'm in, I'm grabbing him. Absolutely take him there as a what-the-heck pick. If he's healthy, he gets in. Heck, if you get 12 games out of him, relatively healthy games out of him, you're going to get great points. And because quarterbacks are so deep this year, all you got to do is grab another one who's safe behind him as your second quarterback, and you're good to go.
To Jim's point, Mike, last year Andrew Luck came back from the injury and looked like he didn't belong in the NFL anymore for the first 3 games. We were writing him off, and then by the season's end, he was as good as any fantasy quarterback in the league.
That's right.
Are we going to see the same thing this year from Luck?
Well, last year it was a shoulder injury. This is a leg injury. Obviously, the shoulder injury is more severe, but if you can't run around out there, it doesn't really matter much what kind of shape his shoulder is in. So in respect to Jim's point, I think that obviously you can take a flyer on somebody like that has the opportunity to provide that much value. But strategically, Tony, I'm just going in. I'm not really thinking about it. There's too many other guys I can grab at QB, either right before that or perhaps right after that. I'll let somebody else take the risk. If I'm going to do it, I'll do what Jim is doing, where I'm taking another QB. You and I have often said in seasonal leagues, I really only need the one QB. I don't get so worried about a backup. But in that instance with Luck, he would have to be my second QB.
Yeah, I wouldn't even mind going back. If we get down to that round, a 10th, 11th, 12th round, I wouldn't mind going back to back, picking Luck and then picking another quarterback
So
after
you could take
that.
Ben and Luck back to back, probably.
Yeah, I wouldn't be anything at all. I could do that. But what about T.Y. Hilton? We saw him with Jacoby Brissett make some big plays, but disappear at times as well. Mack last year got a ton of touchdowns and a great offense behind a great offensive line. You would think Mack in this offense without Andrew Luck would run more, but they would score less. So, Jim, what does it mean for Hilton and Mack?
Yeah, well, okay. Well, Hilton definitely takes a hit, no doubt. Pretty much everybody does. Very few individuals on this team that really don't take a hit with Andrew Luck not on the field. It's simple as that. He just generates the offense, and he is the offense basically at this point. Without him, it's tough. And here's a great stat towards that fact. 70% of Marlon Mack's fantasy points last year came in games where Indy was winning by more than 14 points. In all other games, he averaged just 9 fantasy points a game. So when they were leading big, they were using him to death. When they weren't, that's when all of a sudden you were seeing a lot more Nyheim Hines. And he might be the only guy on the team that gets a bump without Andrew Luck, because they won't get those big leads. They'll probably have to throw a bunch to keep themselves in the game. And Nyheim Hines might be the only one that gets any kind of little bump out of not having Luck.
Your thoughts, Mike, on the Hilton and Mack situation without Andrew Luck?
Yeah, the problem is we've seen Colts running back snaps with starting QB Jacoby Brissett just a couple of days ago, and Marlon Mack had 16 of them, and Nyheim Hines only had 2. Mack was on the field for all the third downs and 1 fourth down. I think it's leading to some evidence that Marlon Mack is going to be a well-rounded, perhaps 3-down back for a lot of the season. Clearly, they'll use Hines in his specialty role, but the Jordan Wilkins role that we thought might be assumed last year is out the window. Of all the guys, I think Mack can really maintain his value. Your point is spot on about them overall being a less efficient, lower scoring offense, but I think Mack can maintain his value. 2 years ago, Hilton's numbers took a huge hit when Luck was out, but Jack Doyle's numbers were really good a couple of years ago. So I think ultimately it's hard to figure out the guy maintaining his value for me the most is Marlon Mack, but you still have to penalize them because the offense just won't be as good.
They won't get to the end zone. Speaking of getting the end zone, the Bears had a problem last year at times. They make a change at running back, and they draft David Montgomery. Jordan Howard's now with the Eagles. Tariq Cohen was the flashy toy that everybody loved. Got to ask Jim, should we be drafting David Montgomery, who's running over people in training camp, ahead of Tariq Cohen?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. Coach even came out and said they're going to, start lessening Cohen's numbers, chances, opportunities, whatever you want to call it, because they used him a little too much last year. And, I said this today on the Frenzy. Look, he didn't get used all that often last year. If that was too much, maybe he shouldn't be playing in the big boy leagues. It's just to me like, okay, that wasn't all that much. How could that be too much? But whatever. But yes, I love Montgomery. I liked him coming in. Even in rookie drafts, I had him as my number one overall, fantasy rookie. And I love him in this offense. Everybody's worried about, what Cohen's going to do. And, you got Mike Davis there too. Look, this kid is better than both of them by far. He just is. He can do a little bit of everything very well. He's a good runner. He can run inside. He can run outside. He can block the quarterback. He can do for the quarterback. He can do whatever you need him to do. And I have no problem whatsoever going up and getting this guy. As a matter of fact, I'll go grab him at the end of the second round because he's started to creep up into that third round. And because I want him so much, I have no problem taking him at the end of that second round. This is a guy that I think has a very good chance of being one of those guys comes out of nowhere and can finish as a top 5, top 6 running back if he gets the full opportunity.
Mike, if you considered Tariq Cohen a number one back last year for the Bears, I'll tell you, I owned him on a couple of good teams, and he was great for games, and then 3 games he would disappear, and he wouldn't be in the stats. If they're talking about giving him less, he could become irrelevant to fantasy owners.
He could, but I don't believe that. I don't see why you take a 23-year-old running back with that kind of skill set and say that we need him to touch the ball less. As Jim said, he was involved in, he had 99 rushes, he had 91 targets. So overall, we're talking 200 plays effectively. Obviously, he's out there for more snaps, but 200 plays that he's involved in, just slightly less than that. And to throttle that down in any significant way makes no sense considering the type of offense that Nagy wants to run, which was not nearly as efficient as people think it was last year. It was about middle of the road. They had very good field position because the Bears forced the most turnovers in the league. So from my perspective, I think the Cohen thing is sort of a flat out lie. I think it could be a push from one year to the next, but I don't think they throttle him down much. I think it's okay to consider Montgomery with the potential to be a star, but I think Cohen's role will at least be a push from one year to the next. And Davis is there at least taking away some touches. Is there the opportunity for Montgomery to just play so well that he breaks out a la Nick Chubb last year? Yeah, I do think that's there. And the offense could be better. I'm betting on Trubisky in a league or two. But I don't think it's going to be pedal to the metal from week 1 to week 16. I think you could have a lean September before Montgomery has a chance to take over. They did pay Mike Davis some money.
But wait, yes, they did. But they paid him that money before the draft just in case, in my mind anyway, that maybe they didn't get the rookie running back that they wanted. They went up, they got this kid, and he has done nothing but wow everybody, right from rookie camp through OTAs and now into preseason. And he's just the team, and it's not just the team saying all the glowing things. Every report you see coming out of that camp from any beat writer, from anybody, is saying that this kid is just playing lights out. And every time he steps on the field that we can see, the kid is bowling people over. He's doing exactly what you want from your main running back. So while I think Mike Davis is a good, back to have on your roster, I think he gives you excellent depth. Man, I can't see them taking the ball out of Montgomery's hands too often to give to Davis.
Tony, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Bears in general this year? They sort of came the Mack. I was fading the Bears a lot of the preseason last year, but the Mack edition I thought totally turned their team around. It took the defense from what was going to be a pretty good defense to an elite defense immediately. And they at 12-4, they blow away the division. Now this year, big expectations. I think I read a couple of days ago they have the most bets out of any team.
Yeah.
They have the most bets placed on them in Vegas right now to win the Super Bowl because they're at 10-1. So a lot of Chicago fans, obviously. But division's tough. Could be a hangover from one year to the next. I don't know. I'm just putting in your hands, asking you the question. Do you think the Bears take a step back this year overall?
You know what? I don't. I like the defense a lot there. I think that you
lost
got
the defensive coordinator, obviously.
Yeah, I think you got to see an improved play from the quarterback position, and I think the biggest thing is I don't think this division's that good. I look at the Detroit Lions twice. I don't think the Green Bay Packers are a team on the rise. I think they're actually going the other way. And when I look at the Minnesota Vikings, we all thought that defense was a vaunted defense. We didn't see that last year. Now, I think they're better offensively than we've had in the past. But I don't think this division is anywhere near it would be. I'd be shocked if this Bears team don't win 10 games.
Yeah, the over-under is 9.5. Road games in Philly, Los Angeles Rams, at Detroit, at Green Bay, at Minnesota. It's all the last 9 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I'm still a believer in the Bears, and we're going to see that opening night, of course, when we get the Bears and the Green Bay Packers going on the Thursday night game there. Jim, what's your thoughts on the Bears?
Oh, I'm all in with you. I agree. I definitely think they're going over the 10 mark. I think that's like one of the best bets for me out of the early props is that I think that the Bears cover that 9.5 with no problem. And I would definitely take that bet easily. And actually, I might, just because I think it's that good a bet.
The Pittsburgh Steelers former running back, we talked about the Jets earlier, Le'Veon Bell, who's going the first round, is going to sit out the entire preseason. He missed all of last season. Does this inactivity, Jim, at least give you some thought? Am I going to get the same Le'Veon Bell if I draft him in fantasy football?
Look, I'm not buying. I mean, I'm not saying the kid's going to be terrible. He's not. He's still a great running back. But again, a lot of it comes down to, can all the new pieces on the offensive line come together and work together? Is it going to be a better offensive line than what they've had in the past? Because that's a big part of Bell's game. We've talked about this, that he's a patient runner. He likes to work behind his line till he finds the right hole and work through that hole. When you don't have a good offensive line, you don't have that luxury. You got to hit a hole, you got to take a hole quick, and you got to go through it. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can hold up behind that kind of pressure, whether or not they can keep opening holes for him and he could dance behind the line. And that's a big thing. And a lot of people say I'm nuts, but I have Connor ahead of Bell this year in my rankings by a decent amount, just because I think it's the system in Pittsburgh that generates great numbers no matter who it is. And I'm just not sure Bell's going to get there. And again, I always lean on this. When Connor was healthy last year, his numbers across the board were better than Bell's in any of Bell's seasons with Pittsburgh.
Mike, you're a big Steelers fan. I agree with what Jim says about Pittsburgh being a better offense, an offensive scheme that fit his style. Might not see the same with the Jets. And then I think about it, a guy that didn't play football for a year, misses the first 4 weeks of the preseason, doesn't play a game. And I think back to Le'Veon Bell's kind of off-the-field situations. I don't think it's a guy that works out real hard. What do you think could happen here? I wouldn't be shocked to see this guy go down in the first 8 weeks.
I mean, that's obviously a difficult thing for me to predict. I would say I would actually push back on the fact that he doesn't work out hard. I'm on board with all the other stuff that you could pick on him for, the quote unquote girlfriends that are robbing his house and all the other stuff that he's been suspended for. But he was never a guy that outside of his rookie year, and I remember you and I talking about this years ago, he showed a really strong work ethic in losing the weight from his rookie season to his second year.
Yeah.
But I do think he has worked hard at. He's never been a guy that's like come into camp out of shape, like we saw with Deontay Foreman in Houston getting traded and jettisoned off of the team for not being in good enough shape. I don't think he won't be in good enough shape. My concerns with Bell are really around how good this Jets offensive line can be. They've brought one guy out of retirement. They traded the Raiders for Kelechi Osemele, which he's a very talented name, but I don't think the Raiders would get rid of a top guard in the league just because they didn't want him around. I don't know if that he's at the heights where he once was. My concerns are really about that. But the workload his ability to still be able to be a playmaker and possibly the second best pass catcher on this team, maybe even the best. I just think the volume is going to be there that I can't quarrel with Jim with the Connor Bell thing. I think it's really close, but I don't think there's much of a gap there.
I'll tell you what, let's go from his former teammate, Antonio Brown, on every other sports show in America. This guy's the topic, and I don't get it, to be honest with you. We had the whole feet issue. Now it's a helmet issue, and Antonio Brown's doing his best to stay in the news. But I don't understand why this is an issue. Antonio Brown wants to wear his helmet, which basically I don't understand how he's been able to pull this off. He wore in high school, he wore in college, and he wore in the pros. Now, they never let me keep my high school football helmet. I don't think they would let you bring it to college, but that's a story, and he's sticking to it. We have people in the United States of America riding motorcycles with no helmet in certain states. Why can't we just sign a waiver and let this guy put whatever he wants on his head? He's acting ridiculous, and let it be an end of the story.
Jim, you got to take that one first.
Okay. Again, I thought he was going to you, so. They can't do that because what that does is it sets a precedent. If they let him sign a waiver for this, then everybody else who's got something they want to do different, maybe somebody wants to wear, Converse sneakers instead. Who knows? I mean, anything like that, it just opens the door. Well, you let him sign a waiver for that. Why can't you let me sign a waiver for this? So it really comes down to setting that precedent, and that's something they just don't want to do.
Do you believe that he has his high school and college helmet, Jim, or do you find the story fiction?
I find it a little fictional. Yeah, I'm with you. I definitely had to turn my helmets back in.
Mike, what's your thoughts on the Antonio Brown saga?
Well, Gary Busey, who's probably on the same level of nuts that Antonio Brown is, had an entire nation start to change motorcycle helmet laws, and here we are with Antonio Brown with his blonde mustache trying to get laws overturned in the opposite direction. Like Jim said, it's a blanket rule. Le'Veon Bell came out, his former teammate, and said, it's a rule. We just got to move on. Even Drew Rosenhaus, who never sounded reasonable on Wingo and Golick and Wingo this morning, giving an interview about how this was never about Antonio Brown holding out and that he would refuse to play the game that he loves. So he's trying to get the helmet. It's not going to happen. Maybe he'll find this one helmet that's between 8 and 10 years old because they stopped making it 8 years ago, and it can't be older than 10 years. So somewhere out there in some high school locker room, I'm sure there's a helmet there that somebody will find, the shut air advantage. But the reality is he's nuts. I mean, you're right. He's nuts. Everything he's done suggests that he's nuts. Doesn't mean he's not great, but he's nuts.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I have him on one team so far.
That's about what you should have. I think keep it at one. I think you keep it at one. Everybody just I saw a Twitter exchange about this. One of our friends, JJ, late round QB, traded him because he didn't want to deal with the whole thing, and Mike Clay decided that was going to be his one share of Antonio Brown for the year. So
I'm a little concerned because
you should be.
He's missed a lot of time. And Jim, there's a story that they can't get him off his cell phone during team meetings.
Oh, I hadn't seen that story yet. Yeah, that's
checking his bank accounts, Jim.
Oh, nice.
Showing people's bank accounts.
I've been staying away. I was buying into him. I thought he would still do well, even with Carr. But with all this nonsense going on, the fact that he's missing all of this practice time with his new offense, with his new quarterback, is really, setting me back. But again, this comes into play. Again, you got to be the savvy fantasy football owner and say, okay, look, he's getting off to a slow start with his team. There's a very good chance he comes out of the gate with the first couple games, maybe playing slow, not getting up to speed, not being on the right page with his quarterback. At that point, if he does, you may have some owners out there that are ready to bail. And that, for me, that would be the time where I would swoop in and say, I'll take the chance on him at this point. We know he's on the field by then. We know he's playing. And as he goes through the season, I got to expect he gets stronger and stronger as the season goes on. So for me, I don't want to draft him right now. But if he starts off the first couple of weeks where he's not really doing much, that's the time when I'm going to start thinking about going in and trying to grab him.
I agree with Jim. I actually do that. If he looks like he's playing and he's out there and people panic. It's 13 games in most leagues, the regular season fantasy. People panic early. If he comes off to a couple subpar efforts, you can go out there and grab him for 50 cents on the dollar. That would be a smart move and something to pay attention to. Speaking of wide receivers, and elite wide receivers, I've got a list of the top 5 wide receivers thus far in preseason, and I want to ask you guys which one will have the better season. Are you ready? Number 1 in receiving in the NFL in preseason is Tanner Hudson. Number 2 is the Steelers' James Washington. Number 3, New England Patriots' Jacoby Myers. And the next 2 guys are from the Cleveland Browns, Rashid Higgins and DJ Montgomery. Jim, start with you. Who has the better season out of these 5 illustrious wide receivers eating it up in preseason?
Well, I'm going to go with Higgins just because I think he's going to take over that number 3 role there in Cleveland. I'm not really worried about Callaway. The team wasn't really into him anyway. He dropped too many passes last year, did too many things wrong, and now, of course, the suspension. I just think that he's going to get the bigger chance. The other guys, I mean, most of those guys are going to be trying out for the XFL, soon.
You know what? I think, though, James Washington, I would pick Higgins, too. I think he's the best player out of them.
Yeah.
But James Washington's intriguing to me because I think there's a chance that if he gets off to a decent start, he's played well in preseason, there were expectations for him in that good Pittsburgh offense. It wouldn't shock me if he has an opportunity early in the year.
Yeah, but my concern is that Dante Moncrief has actually supplanted him as that number 2 wide receiver. It is what a lot of stories that have been written have said. I thought it was worth taking a chance on Washington in drafts. It still is to some extent because you can get him so cheap. But I thought it was worth taking a chance on him to be the number 2. But I haven't read anything that suggests that he will be the number 2. Just because he's catching passes from Josh Dobbs doesn't mean that he has solidified this role. It seems odd to me that Dante Moncrief would have this role, his third team in 3 years. But if James Washington isn't getting it done, what else are they left to do? Jacoby Myers, shout out to his parents who obviously watch a lot of daytime television in the tri-state area because there was a law firm down here for years called Jacoby and Myers that handled like your slip and fall and your work comp accidents. Interesting that somebody would name their kid after that law firm.
Well, maybe that law firm made them a lot of money at some point. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's true.
I've been saying this all off season. I like Moncrief in that number 2 role. He's just more dependable at this point than James Washington is. And sure, he's having a great preseason, but Washington is still going before Moncrief. So he actually gives you no value at that point, unless he outright wins the job. And I don't see that happening. I've seen some reports that from ESPN, no doubt, that have said that some of the people inside the Pittsburgh organization, and of course, you know how that goes. You never know who it is. It could be a freaking water boy for all we know. And somebody in the building in Pittsburgh said that Deontay Johnson is even ahead of James Washington on the depth charts as of now. The rookie is. Look, James Washington, he was flashy last year in the preseason. He had the one preseason game, he had 5 catches, 144 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and everybody crowned him king. And then all of a sudden, he wasn't on the field. He wasn't getting any playing time. And it's obvious that he was having issues with something, whether it be the playbook, picking up the defenses, whatever it was, he was having issues. Well, it seems like he's still having those issues because while he's doing well in preseason, as Mike was saying, with the second and third string quarterback against the second and third string defenses, he hasn't been enough. The fact that he was still on the field and Dante Moncrief wasn't, says a lot because usually the guys, they don't have their starters on the field for that. And he was, and Moncrief wasn't.
Well, guys, we got to get ready. We got to get prepared for the Landry Fields breakdown as we prepare for these XFL drafts that we got going on and get prepared here. So we've got to end this show real quickly so we can get back to the Landry Fields and breaking down the film for all these future XFLers. Are you looking forward to that, Mike Blewett?
Yeah, I can't wait. He's the 4th most passing yards in NCAA history, so clearly he's got a bright future in front of him in the XFL. They named the LA team the Wildcats. Can we just retire the Wildcats nickname? They couldn't think of anything else?
Hey, well, it's still better than the New York team Guardians. Come on.
At least it's different.
Yeah, come on, Guardians. I mean,
The
that's so
Wildcats,
blah,
there's
just
like
funny.
40 college teams named the Wildcats.
I think Tampa Bay's the Vipers, and when I heard that, it reminded me like of a roller derby name. Like they were the Tampa Bay Vipers. I could see that being a good roller derby
old
name.
Soccer, the old
one of them was what, the
NISL team, the Tampa Bay Rowdies. Remember
which one?
Indoor soccer team?
Yeah. Jim, what was the best name you liked?
No, the XFL. Wasn't it Battle Hawks or something?
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. I like something like that. It almost makes me think of Battle Bots, when you got the robots fighting. I like that name. But Guardians, to me, that's so meh. Like, really, in New York, you can't come up with something better than Guardians? I hate that.
There you have it, folks. WTF Fantasy Football. Jim Day, where can we find you throughout the week?
Oh, man. FNTSY Sports Network, Monday through Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. on the Fantasy Football Frenzy every day. Just a lot of fun. Got a new show coming up on Sunday mornings from 9 to 10 on the FNTSY with Joe Pisapia, the Roto Experts in the Morning Show. Every Wednesday night is here, but every Friday night I do the FF Champs After Dark with Andy Singleton and a bunch of other stuff going on in between. And, of course, at FF Champs right now, we have extended one last time our promo codes. So if you haven't gotten in on this yet, you have to do it. We have so many great tools for you. Come on in. Our promo code, you can get $40 off our premium membership using promo code 2019, and you can get $20 off our basic membership using promo code DRAFT. Come on over, check us out. A lot of great stuff for you there. We'll even run your drafts for you or help you run your drafts right through the site. It's a great tool. A lot of good stuff. Come check it out.
Mike, I noticed that Jim is only working with co-hosts that have less hair than him with Pisapia and Kurtz. Jim is out-hairing them.
Well, Jim can beat them in several other categories, I'm sure, including football knowledge. But I'm just glad to see that you gotta pick your spots. But Jim can be found on more podcasts than anybody I know, which is a good thing.
Mike, where can people find you? You're a little less out there than Jim, so
slightly less. But on Fantasy Sports Radio Network, weekend mornings and weeknights, you'll hear me a whole bunch. By the way, shout out to Landry Fields, the former Stanford basketball player, and not Landry Jones, who was the first pick in the XFL draft.
That's bad.
I knew something didn't sound right to me, but it didn't click.
That's bad when the first pick in your league, somebody forgets his last name. That's not good. Not good at all. Landry Fields, though, Mike, good research on your part, or did you know that right off there?
I knew it. You said Fields the second time, and it clicked in my head that we were talking about a basketball player, not a football player.
He wasn't a bad three-point shooter.
He was good. He had a nice run in the league.
There you go. Landry Fields, absolutely getting it done. First time on WTF Fantasy Football. Probably not the last time. We'll probably go Landry Fields.
Get him on as a guest.
See what he knows
about fantasy football.
I'm sure there's no other podcast out there talking about him.
So, guys, we'll be back next week. Make sure you tune in. Everybody's getting ready for the drafts. We're drafting. We'll share some of our drafts next week on how they're going. There's a lot of big drafts going on right now. And, Jim, I know you participate in at least one every day.
I try, Tony. I definitely try. It's the only thing that keeps me sane.
That's debatable. WTF Fantasy Football. Mike Blewett, Jim Day, Tony Sincata. We're out of here.